The harsh realities of the African wilderness are well known to anyone who has spent time studying the intricate web of life that exists on the savanna. Nature operates according to principles that seem cruel by human standards, where predator and prey are locked in an eternal dance of survival that has remained unchanged for millions of years. Lions hunt zebras, leopards stalk gazelles, and hyenas pursue wildebeest across the plains in scenes that play out with predictable regularity. This is the natural order, a system so fundamental that it forms the very foundation of ecological balance. Yet every so often, nature presents us with something so extraordinary, so seemingly impossible, that it forces us to question everything we think we understand about animal behavior and instinct. What you're about to hear is one such story, an account so remarkable that when it first surfaced, many experts dismissed it as fiction or misidentification. But the evidence was undeniable, documented by multiple witnesses and captured on camera in a series of images that would spark debate among wildlife researchers for years to come. The Samburu National Reserve in northern Kenya is a place of stark beauty, where arid landscapes meet riverine forests to create habitats that support an incredible diversity of wildlife. This reserve, though less famous than some of Kenya's other parks, has long been cherished by serious wildlife enthusiasts for its unique ecosystem and the remarkable animal behaviors that can be observed here. The reserve is home to several species rarely seen elsewhere, and its relatively remote location means that the animals here often behave with less awareness of human presence than their counterparts in more heavily visited parks. It was in this wild and rugged place that one of the most astonishing wildlife observations ever recorded would take place. An event that would challenge fundamental assumptions about predatory instinct and maternal behavior in wild animals. The story begins with a young wildlife photographer named David Kimani, whose passion for capturing the beauty of African wildlife had brought him to Samburu on an extended research assignment. David had been working on a long-term project documenting the behavior of the reserve's predators, particularly focusing on a pride of lions that he had been following for several months. He had come to know the individual members of this pride well, recognizing each lion by their unique features and personality traits. Among them was a young lioness he had named Kamunyak, a Samburu word meaning the Blessed One. Kamunyak was approximately 4 years old, an age when lionesses typically begin having their first cubs and settling into their role within the pride's complex social structure. David had been particularly interested in following Kamunyak because she had always displayed somewhat unusual behavior compared to other lionesses in the group. While most lionesses were efficient and ruthless hunters, Kamunyak often seemed hesitant during kills, hanging back and allowing other pride members to make the final strike. David had initially attributed this to inexperience or a naturally gentler temperament, noting it as an interesting behavioral variation but not thinking much more about it. However, what he was about to discover would reveal that Kamunyak's unusual nature went far deeper than simple hunting reluctance. On a morning that began like any other, David set out before dawn to locate the pride, following their tracks from the previous evening and using his knowledge of their territory to predict where they might have settled for the night. The early morning light was just beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold when he spotted movement near a cluster of acacia trees about 200 meters from the main dirt track. Through his binoculars, David could see that it was Kamunyak, separated from the rest of the pride and appearing to be focused intently on something in the grass before her. His first thought was that she had made a kill and was feeding, a common enough sight that wouldn't have warranted special attention. However, something about her posture seemed different. She wasn't crouched over prey in the typical feeding position. Instead, she was lying on her side in a relaxed manner, and whatever had her attention appeared to be quite close to her body. David's curiosity was immediately piqued. He carefully maneuvered his vehicle closer, moving slowly to avoid disturbing the lioness or whatever she was doing. As the distance closed and his view became clearer, David felt his heart begin to race. What he was seeing simply couldn't be real, yet there it was, undeniable and extraordinary. Nestled against Kamunyak's belly, pressed close to her body in the exact position that lion cubs would naturally assume when nursing, was a baby deer. More specifically, it was a young Besa oryx calf, a species that under normal circumstances would represent nothing more than a meal to any lion. The tiny creature, which couldn't have been more than a few days old, based on its size and the condition of its umbilical cord stump, was actively nursing from the lioness. David blinked hard, wondering if the early morning light was playing tricks on his eyes or if exhaustion from days in the field was causing him to hallucinate. But when he raised his camera and looked through the telephoto lens, the image became even clearer and more impossible to deny. Kamunyak was lying perfectly still, her expression peaceful, occasionally turning her head to gently nuzzle the nursing oryx calf with her nose in the same tender manner that lionesses show toward their own cubs. David's hands trembled as he began taking photographs, knowing that what he was documenting would be considered extraordinary by any wildlife expert. He had studied animal behavior extensively in preparation for his photography career, and he knew that what he was witnessing violated every known principle of predator-prey relationships. Lions were obligate carnivores, creatures whose entire evolutionary history had shaped them into perfect killing machines designed to hunt hoofed animals exactly like this oryx calf. The idea that a lioness would not only refrain from killing such vulnerable prey, but would actually allow it to nurse was so far outside the realm of normal behavior that David struggled to process what his eyes were showing him. He continued photographing for nearly 30 minutes, capturing image after image of this impossible scene, the lioness and the oryx calf in peaceful coexistence that defied all logical explanation. Eventually, Kamunyak stood up, causing the oryx calf to stumble slightly before finding its footing on shaky legs. The lioness bent down and sniffed the small creature thoroughly, her massive head nearly as large as the calf's entire body. David held his breath, wondering if the spell was about to break, if the lioness's predatory instincts would suddenly reassert themselves. But instead of attacking, Kamunyak gently licked the calf's face and neck, grooming it with the same care a mother would show her offspring. The calf responded by pressing close to the lioness's legs, apparently completely comfortable in the presence of this predator. David watched in amazement as Kamunyak began walking slowly through the grass, with the oryx calf following close behind her like a duckling following its mother. The lioness would pause frequently, looking back to ensure the calf was keeping up, adjusting her pace to accommodate its short, uncertain steps. As the sun climbed higher and the heat of the day began to build, Kamunyak led the calf to a shaded area beneath a large tree. She settled down in the shade, and the calf immediately lay down beside her, pressing its small body against the lioness's fur. David remained with them throughout the entire day, documenting this extraordinary relationship and trying to understand what could possibly explain it. He observed Kamunyak repeatedly nursing the calf, grooming it, and protecting it from the harsh sun. When other members of the pride came near, Kamunyak actually growled warnings at them, making it absolutely clear that the oryx calf was under her protection and was not to be harmed. The other lions seemed confused by this behavior, approaching cautiously to investigate before ultimately respecting Kamunyak's obvious claim over the strange small creature in her care. As afternoon turned to evening, David faced a difficult decision. He needed to leave the reserve to reach the nearest town with internet connection so he could share his photographs and seek expert advice on what he was witnessing. However, he was deeply concerned about leaving Kamunyak and the calf alone, worried about what might happen during the night. The African darkness brought with it numerous dangers, from hyenas to other predators that might not share Kamunyak's inexplicable protective feelings toward the vulnerable oryx. Reluctantly, David marked the location carefully on his GPS and drove back to town, his mind racing with questions and theories about what he had observed. That evening, he uploaded his photographs to a secure server and sent messages to several wildlife biologists he knew, including Dr. Sarah Mwangi, a renowned expert in carnivore behavior who worked with the Kenya Wildlife Service. Dr. Mwangi's response came within hours, and her message conveyed both excitement and skepticism. She had seen the photographs and admitted that if they were genuine and unmanipulated, they represented one of the most extraordinary wildlife observations ever documented. However, she also cautioned that such behavior was so far outside normal lion patterns that alternative explanations needed to be carefully considered. She asked whether the calf might already have been dead when Kamunyak found it, whether there could be some illness affecting the lioness's behavior, or whether this might be an elaborate case of mistaken identity where the lioness somehow believed the oryx to be a lion cub. Dr. Mwangi made arrangements to travel to Samburu immediately, understanding that if this was genuine, it needed to be studied and documented with scientific rigor before the inevitable happened, and the calf either died or was killed. David returned to the location before dawn the next morning, his heart pounding with anxiety about what he might find. In the darkness before sunrise, it would be easy for tragedy to have struck, for hyenas to have discovered the calf, for Kamunyak to have reverted to her natural predatory instincts. As the first light began to illuminate the landscape, David's relief was overwhelming. There, in nearly the exact same spot where he had left them, were Kamunyak and the oryx calf, both alive and apparently well. The calf was nursing again, and Kamunyak was awake and alert, her eyes scanning the surrounding area for any potential threats. David settled in to continue his observation, noting every detail of their interaction in his field journal while taking hundreds more photographs to build a comprehensive record of this unprecedented behavior. Over the next several days, as Dr. Mwangi and a small team of researchers arrived to observe and study the situation, the relationship between Kamunyak and the oryx calf continued. The lioness demonstrated remarkably consistent maternal behavior, allowing the calf to nurse regularly, despite the fact that she had never given birth and therefore was not producing milk in quantities sufficient to sustain the growing animal. The researchers noted that the calf was beginning to show signs of malnutrition, as it clearly needed more sustenance than Kamunyak could provide. But it was equally clear that the lioness was trying her best to care for the small creature. She kept it clean through constant grooming, protected it from the sun during the hottest parts of the day, and fiercely defended it from any potential threats, including other members of her own pride who showed too much interest in the unusual addition to their group. Dr. Mwangi and her team conducted extensive observations, trying to understand what could possibly explain Kamunyak's behavior. They noted that the lioness showed no signs of rabies, toxoplasmosis, or other diseases that might alter behavior through neurological effects. Her physical condition was excellent, and aside from this one extraordinary behavioral aberration, she seemed to be a completely normal, healthy lioness. The researchers theorized that Kamunyak might have recently lost cubs of her own, perhaps to infanticide by a rival male or to disease, and that the powerful maternal hormones still flooding her system had created an overwhelming drive to care for offspring, any offspring, even those that should naturally be prey. This theory was supported by the fact that Kamunyak's body showed subtle signs consistent with recent pregnancy, including slightly enlarged mammary glands and certain behavioral patterns typical of nursing mothers. However, even this theory had significant problems. While cross-species adoption had been documented in captive animals and even occasionally in the wild, it typically involved species that were somewhat similar in size, appearance, or behavior. Dogs had been known to adopt orphaned tiger cubs in zoos, for instance, because cubs and puppies shared enough characteristics that maternal instinct could bridge the gap. But a lioness adopting an oryx calf was dramatically different. The calf looked nothing like a lion cub, moved differently, sounded different, and even smelled different. Every sensory input should have been screaming to Kamunyak's brain that this was prey, not offspring. Yet somehow, some combination of factors had overridden millions of years of predatory programming and activated maternal behaviors instead. Dr. Mwangi admitted to David one evening that they were witnessing something that challenged fundamental assumptions about the flexibility of instinctive behavior in wild animals. As the days passed, the situation became increasingly complex. The oryx calf was clearly not thriving on the limited nourishment it could obtain from Kamunyak. It was growing weaker, less steady on its feet, and spending more time lying down. The researchers faced an agonizing ethical dilemma. Should they intervene, removing the calf from Kamunyak's care and attempting to hand-raise it themselves, thereby saving its life, but potentially traumatizing the lioness who had formed such an intense bond? Or should they allow nature to take its course, documenting this extraordinary behavior even as it led to the calf's inevitable death from malnutrition? The debate among the team was heated, with passionate arguments on both sides. Some argued that intervention was necessary from a welfare perspective, that allowing a young animal to slowly starve was cruel regardless of how scientifically interesting the situation might be. Others contended that intervening would corrupt the natural process they were observing and might cause Kamunyak significant distress. The decision was ultimately made for them by circumstances beyond their control. On the 5th day of observation, a large male lion from a neighboring territory entered the area, likely drawn by the unusual concentration of vehicles and human activity. This male had no connection to Kamunyak's pride and no reason to respect her protection of the strange creature in her care. When he spotted the oryx calf, his predatory instincts were immediate and overwhelming. He began stalking toward Kamunyak and the calf with clear intentions. Kamunyak recognized the danger instantly. She positioned herself between the advancing male and her adopted offspring, growling warnings and displaying defensive postures. For several tense minutes, it appeared she might actually fight to protect the calf, a battle she would almost certainly lose given the male's superior size and strength. The researchers watched helplessly, knowing they could not and should not intervene in this natural interaction. At the last moment, as the male prepared to charge, members of Kamunyak's pride arrived, drawn by the sounds of confrontation. The presence of multiple lionesses changed the dynamics completely. United, they successfully drove the male away from their territory, their combined aggression forcing him to retreat. Kamunyak immediately returned to the calf, which had been hiding in tall grass during the confrontation, and began frantically grooming and comforting it. But the incident had made one thing absolutely clear to Dr. Mwangi and her team. The calf could not survive in this situation. Even if Kamunyak's devotion never wavered, other predators would eventually succeed in killing the weak and malnourished young oryx. The researchers made the difficult decision to intervene. The capture operation was carefully planned to minimize stress to both animals. Using tranquilizer darts, they sedated Kamunyak just long enough to safely remove the oryx calf from her care. The calf was immediately taken to a wildlife rehabilitation facility where it could receive proper nutrition and veterinary care. When Kamunyak woke from sedation and discovered that her adopted offspring was gone, her reaction was heartbreaking. She searched the area frantically, calling out repeatedly, exhibiting all the signs of a mother who had lost her cub. For 3 days she remained in the area where she had last been with the calf, refusing to hunt or rejoin her pride, clearly distressed by the disappearance. The researchers, watching from a distance, found themselves questioning whether they had made the right decision, seeing the obvious emotional pain their intervention had caused. Eventually, Kamunyak's behavior began to return to normal. She rejoined her pride, resumed hunting, and gradually seemed to recover from the loss. However, Dr. Mwangi noted that the lioness continued to display unusual gentleness during hunts for months afterward, often allowing prey to escape when she could easily have made a kill. It was as if the experience had fundamentally altered something in her behavioral programming, creating lasting changes to her predatory instincts. The oryx calf, meanwhile, survived and thrived in rehabilitation. When it was old enough and strong enough, it was successfully released back into a protected area of the reserve far from Kamunyak's territory. It went on to live a normal life, eventually joining a herd of oryx and producing offspring of its own, completely unaware of how extraordinary its earliest days had been. The scientific papers that emerged from this observation sparked intense debate in the wildlife biology community. Some researchers argued that Kamunyak's behavior could be explained through the lens of hormonal disruption caused by lost cubs, suggesting that maternal instinct was so powerful it could temporarily override predatory instinct under certain circumstances. Others proposed more complex theories involving individual personality variation in animals, suggesting that some individuals might naturally possess temperamental traits that make them more likely to display unusual behaviors. A few scientists remained skeptical of the entire account, despite the photographic evidence, arguing that there must be details missing from the story that would make the behavior seem less extraordinary if they were known. What made Kamunyak's story even more remarkable was that it was not an isolated incident. In the months and years following the first observation, the same lioness was documented adopting oryx calves on 5 separate occasions. Each time the pattern was similar. Kamunyak would find a newborn or very young calf, apparently separated from its mother, and would immediately display maternal behavior toward it, protecting it, grooming it, and attempting to nurse it. Each time the situation ended the same way, with researchers intervening to save the calf from malnutrition or with the calf succumbing to other predators despite Kamunyak's fierce protection. The repeated nature of this behavior eliminated many of the theories that might have explained a single incident. This was not a one-time hormonal aberration or a case of mistaken identity. This was a consistent behavioral pattern that appeared to be a fundamental part of Kamunyak's personality. The lioness's repeated adoptions made her famous, drawing wildlife enthusiasts and researchers from around the world to Samburu in hopes of witnessing this extraordinary behavior firsthand. Documentary filmmakers created programs about her story, and she became a symbol of the complex emotional lives of animals and the mysteries that still exist in our understanding of wildlife behavior. The name Kamunyak, the Blessed One, took on deeper meaning as people debated what her behavior might represent. Some saw it as evidence of compassion existing even in creatures shaped by millions of years of predatory evolution. Others viewed it as a tragic malfunction of instinct, a lioness trapped by biological drives that manifested in ways that could never lead to successful offspring rearing. Still others suggested that Kamunyak might represent the next step in evolution, an individual whose brain was capable of overriding ancient programming in ways that could, under different circumstances, lead to new behavioral adaptations. Dr. Mwangi, who continued studying Kamunyak for years, ultimately concluded that the lioness's behavior probably resulted from a combination of factors, including individual temperament, hormonal influences from lost cubs, and possibly even some genetic variation that made her brain chemistry different from other lionesses. She noted that Kamunyak's story was a powerful reminder that animals are individuals, not simply biological machines running predictable programs. Each creature has its own personality, its own quirks, and occasionally its own ways of defying the expectations placed upon it by nature. The fact that Kamunyak's adopted calves never survived didn't diminish the significance of her behavior. If anything, it made it more poignant, a demonstration of the power of maternal instinct, even when that instinct was directed in ways that could never achieve its evolutionary purpose. Kamunyak lived to be approximately 13 years old, a respectable age for a wild lioness. In her later years, she finally gave birth to cubs of her own, displaying excellent maternal care that helped several of her offspring survive to adulthood. Interestingly, she never attempted to adopt another oryx calf after becoming a mother to her own cubs, suggesting that actual motherhood had finally satisfied the drives that had previously manifested in such unusual ways. When she eventually died of natural causes, the wildlife community mourned her passing, recognizing that a truly unique individual had been lost. Her story had taught researchers valuable lessons about the flexibility of animal behavior, the power of individual variation, and the dangers of assuming we fully understand the creatures we study. The legacy of Kamunyak continues to influence wildlife research and conservation efforts. Her story is frequently cited in discussions about animal emotion, cognition, and the ethical considerations involved in wildlife management. The photographs David Kimani captured during those first days of observation remain some of the most remarkable wildlife images ever taken, visual proof of something that seems impossible yet undeniably occurred. The oryx calves she attempted to raise, most of which survived due to human intervention, went on to produce their own offspring, carrying forward their own improbable story of survival. The ripple effects of Kamunyak's story extended far beyond the scientific community, sparking philosophical debates about the nature of instinct, identity, and what it means to be a mother. Ethicists and philosophers found in her behavior a compelling case study that challenged traditional boundaries between human and animal emotional capacity. If a lioness could feel maternal love strong enough to override her predatory nature, to actively protect prey rather than consume it, What did this say about the origins of compassion itself? Religious leaders from various traditions referenced her story in sermons and teachings, some viewing her as evidence of divine grace working even through wild creatures, while others saw her as a parable about the universality of love, transcending biological programming. Child psychologists studying attachment theory found parallels between Kamunyak's behavior and human adoptive mothers, noting that the bond she formed with the oryx calves, though doomed by circumstances, appeared to activate the same neural pathways that create maternal attachment in humans who adopt children genetically unrelated to them. The Lioness became an unexpected ambassador for adoption itself, her story used in educational materials to help adopted children understand that family bonds transcend biology. Conservation organizations leveraged her fame to fundraise for broader wildlife protection initiatives, arguing that if nature could produce such unexpected wonders, humanity had an obligation to preserve the ecosystems that made such diversity possible. In Samburu itself, Kamunyak became woven into the cultural fabric of the region, transcending her role as merely a wildlife curiosity to become something approaching a local legend. The Samburu people, whose intimate relationship with the land stretches back countless generations, incorporated her story into their oral traditions, passing it down alongside ancient tales of shapeshifters, magical encounters, and the deep connections between humans and the natural world. Village elders spoke of her as a spirit creature sent by the gods to remind humans that the divisions we create, predator and prey, wild and tame, possible and impossible, are not as fixed as we imagine. Young Samburu warriors, who traditionally proved their manhood through lion hunting before the practice was discontinued for conservation purposes, told stories around fires about the Lioness who had been different, using her as a teaching example about the value of individuals who break from tradition. Local artists created paintings and sculptures depicting Kamunyak with her adopted calves, images that were sold to tourists and displayed in homes throughout the region. The reserve itself saw a lasting increase in tourism that persisted long after the lioness's death, with visitors specifically requesting to visit the areas where she had once roamed, hoping perhaps to glimpse some remnant of her magic in the landscape. Conservation guides who worked in Samburu during Kamunyak's lifetime found themselves elevated to minor celebrity status, their first-hand accounts of the lioness's behavior treasured by tourists and researchers alike. Several wrote books or gave lectures internationally, becoming ambassadors not just for this one remarkable animal, but for African wildlife conservation broadly. And on slow nights, when the moon rose over the reserve and lions called in the distance, guides still occasionally pointed to the stars and told visitors that Kamunyak watched over the oryxes still, her spirit ensuring that the impossible she had made real would never be forgotten. A legend carved not just in stories, but in the collective memory of everyone who had witnessed what should never have been. A lioness whose heart was large enough to love what her nature told her she should kill. And in Samburu National Reserve, guides still tell visitors about the legendary lioness who nursed baby deer, a tale that seems too fantastic to be true, yet is documented fact. A reminder that the natural world will always hold mysteries that challenge our understanding and inspire our wonder. The question posed in the title of this story, "Is this even possible?" has been definitively answered. Yes, it is possible. It happened. And in happening, it revealed truths about the complexity of animal behavior that science is still working to fully understand.